Submit all. There they are. Hello, everybody. Nine, 10. Good, good, good. Let's do this. Let's get the printer book over here. Stuff. Very good. All right. Oh. Great. 12. That's about right. All right. How's everybody doing today? Do I have any nightmare comments about the homework assignment? I only had two people contact me about it, so I'm assuming that it wasn't that terribly difficult. Hopefully that's the case.
The following explanation that you provided really helped.
Oh, good. Okay. Good. Yeah, I did that after the first person contacted me and was asking questions about, forget what it was, frames per second.
Yeah, I mean, it helped a little bit. I hoped I did well on it. I'm still kind of lost a little bit on some of this stuff, but yeah, it still helped.
Are you the one that sent in a second copy?
Yeah, I sent in a second copy after you explained it a little bit better. So I'm hoping that I did a little bit better on the second try here.
Did the system accept it as a submission for that page?
Yeah, it's it accepted as a resubmission.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then there should be two documents there for me to open then, right? I just opened the second one?
Yeah, I would assume that's how it works. I don't know how Canvas works for teachers, but yeah.
Poorly. That's all I can say about that. Yeah, I'll look for it. Should be fine.
Cool.
All right. Well, I was hoping we can get a couple more folks, but let's move on. All right. Sharing my screen now. All right. So I just published your week 10 stuff this morning. So let me just point some stuff out to you really quick. Okay. So we're here, depth of field. So we just finished week 9 and your exposure worksheet was due on Sunday night. Okay. So what I've done is with the last couple assignments, I think was I made the due date like Monday night at midnight instead of Sunday. But if you're late, per the syllabus, I'm going to dock you 10 points per day. So if you turn it on Tuesday, that's 20 points. Not going to take stuff after like Wednesday, right? So once you've lost 30 points, I mean, it's, the grade is, it's pretty bad. So bear that in mind. So nobody should have any problem submitting their assignments by Sunday night at midnight. I had a couple of people say they couldn't submit last week. So, and now we're here. Now we're going to talk about depth of field this week. And this should be a much easier conversation for you folks now, given that we've talked about, this will be the third time now the depth of field is coming up in conversation in this class. So hopefully it's starting to gel. If it's not, I'm still available via Zoom meetings or phone or email or whatever if you've got questions. Okay. Okay, so let's get to the blah, blah, blah presentation, get that out of the way, and then I can take your questions and we can get out of here. Okay, so this is depth of field, and I want to talk to it just now in terms of the selective focus nature of depth of field. In other words, I want to talk to you about the factors that are affecting it, really talk about it as a compositional tool, and then I'll just sort of retouch on it as an aspect of exposure, really from a review standpoint. Okay. So what is it? What is it actually? Okay. So depth of field is determined by your lens focal length, your aperture, the distance from your camera to your subject, and conversely, the distance from the subject to the background. That's going to determine whether or not your backgrounds remain in focus. Okay. So as focal length, distance, or the f number increases, the depth of field increases. However, increasing the size of the aperture, lowering the f-stop number, reduces the depth of field. So sensor size is going to affect depth of field only in the sense that if you have a full frame camera, and in other words, a camera with a sensor that's 24 by 36 millimeters, and you are using a 50 millimeter Rokinon Cinema Prime, like you can get from the UCF film office, your image is going to have what we call a standard point of view, which is essentially what your eyes can see without any peripheral vision. That's how we sort of think of a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. If you take that same lens and put it on a camera with a much smaller sensor, the image circle that lens is generating is meant to cover a much larger sensor. So the smaller sensor is in essence only seeing a portion of that total image circle. The effect appears to be magnification. Okay. So the 50 millimeter lens on, say, a Panasonic GH5 with a sensor that's only, 19 millimeters by I think 17.3 millimeters, something like that. The effect is going to be essentially the 50 millimeter will look more like a 100 millimeter lens on the GH5, the same Rokinon 50 millimeter. Okay. Of course, you have to use an adapter to put it onto the GH5, because the GH5 is going to have a micro four thirds lens flange or lens mount, and the Canon 5D is going to have a Canon EF lens flange. Okay. So in order to use a Canon EF 50 millimeter lens on a GH5, we have to use the adapter. We talked about those in week 5 or 6, I think. Okay. So a 50 millimeter lens on the Canon is going to have a certain feel to the image, like the background and the foreground are going to have a certain relationship based on that field of view on that sensor. And the 50 millimeter on the Canon 5D acts more like a wide lens than it does on the GH5. On the GH5, it works more like a telephoto lens. Well, the telephoto aspects of field of view would indicate that backgrounds can look a little softer and a little bit different than they do on the Canon full-size sensor. Backgrounds on the full-size sensor with the 50 millimeter lens will look further away, more like wide angle in comparison. And the 50 millimeter lens on the GH5 is now acting like a 100 millimeter lens. And so the backgrounds are going to look like they're closer to the foreground than they really are, but more out of focus than they would on the Canon camera. Okay, so that's going to have an apparent change in the way your depth of field works on two different kinds of cameras. But the net effect, if you could look at the net effect at the granular or at the pixel site level, the net effect is not too terribly different between the two different cameras, but it's the illusion of telephoto on the GH5 that makes us think that we have a different depth of field happening than we really do. Okay. But essentially, aside from that, on the same camera, for instance, on the same 5D, the 50 millimeter lens is going to have a certain amount of background focus and foreground focus, in addition to your point of specific or your plane of focus. A 35 millimeter on that same camera within that same system, and not say a Rokinon 35 millimeter lens, is going to appear to have more depth of field because of its wider angle and wider field of view. Okay. So lens size will affect your depth of field when you're comparing the same series of lenses on the same camera. It only changes and plays games when you start switching sensor sizes. Okay. The aperture is at the heart of what's going on here. Okay. So depth of field is a product of the f-stop, a product of the camera to subject distance, conversely the subject to background distance, and then the lens you're using. Okay. This is probably a 50 millimeter lens on a Canon 5D at about 12 inches from the cue ball. Okay. You guys saw this video last week on aperture, so I won't show it again in class, but if you need to, revisit this to think about what aperture is doing again, by all means, it's in web courses in week 9 under videos, and you can check that out once again. You'll recall this diagram that I showed you last week, referencing the different sizes of the f-stops present within the structure of our cinema lens. And I showed you, I think, the 85 the other day, and how it can, how the aperture is in there, and it's controlled by the manual f-stop ring that's on the outside of the barrel, okay, if it's a cinema lens. And the f-stops refer to the diameter of that iris inside, okay? Small diameters give you less or more depth of field. We talked about this last week a little bit.
More?
More, yeah. And wide f-stops like this one give you less apparent depth of field between the plane of focus and the background, or the plane of focus in the foreground. Okay. So in a scene, in reality, you can capture, if you're out in the bright sun, for instance, you close down your aperture to let less light through the lens to strike the sensor. This will prevent overexposure, so the scene doesn't look too bright, too over bright. We darken the image by closing down the f-stop. In reality, we can open up our aperture to let more light through the lens, and this will allow, this will require other equipment to help us balance exposure. At that point, I talked to you guys about the variable neutral density filter the other day. So I have a quick video clip to show you guys, just to demonstrate what that's doing. In case you can't visualize it, I went to Cape Canaveral this weekend, and I went to the Astronaut Memorial, and I shot some stuff with the variable neutral density filter, just to show you what's happening from the point of view of your little Panasonic FC1000 that you guys can check out from school. Okay, so I'm using the same equipment you guys have access to, right, and showing you what the results can look like. I also wanted to show you an alternate scale of numbers here, okay, because f-stops come in a variety of combinations, and usually it's one of two standard sets of f-stops, and I found a graphic that illustrates those two sets here. So one of them starts at f1.0 and goes all the way to f16, and the other starts at f1.4 and goes all the way to f22. And if you look at these, there's a really neat pattern that's happening here. I was talking to a couple of you that stayed late with the discussion last week about the f-stops, and there was some anxiety expressed about, all of this is new, and I understand that you're thinking about these numbers and looking at these sets of numbers for the first time, and really you have no frame of reference yet until you start shooting a lot and getting used to seeing these numbers coming up in conversation, coming up in your viewfinder, on your camera, or in your readouts on your LCDs. Until that becomes second nature, my recommendation was to print out the worksheet that you guys had for a homework assignment and keep page 2 in your camera bag when you go out shooting, so that you have those little jump charts. And one of those jump charts was an f-stop scale, so that you always have handy that little cheat sheet that you can work from if you're out taking pictures. But if you look at these two scales really quick, the f-stop scales, you'll notice that the one that starts at f1, it skips 1.4 and it'll go from f1 to f2, f2 to f4, f4 to f8, f8 to f16, right? And every time you make a jump, the jump is doubling the f number, right? And we know that every time we make a jump on an f-stop scale, we change our exposure by one measured increment of one f-stop, right? So if you look at the 1.4 scale, it starts at 1.4. Sometimes you have a 2 on the barrel, but the next full stop is 2.8. And then the next full stop from there is 5.6. You'll have a 4 printed on the barrel, but the full f-stop, well, actually, that's not true either. I should take this graphic down. I just realized that's an error. It's doubling every other f-stop, but your full stops are 1.4 to 2, 2 to 2.8, 2 to 2.8 to 4, 4 to 5.6. That's deceiving. I think I will stop using this graphic. Okay. Erase your programming. Let's move on to the next image. Let's use this one. This is more reliable. I like this one. This is the same jump chart I gave you on the worksheet. Every time you jump from one f-stop to the next, it's one full f-stop of change in exposure. And it's either brightening or darkening the image, depending on which way you go. On your jump charts, it'll tell you darker this way and brighter this way. And I like that secondary thought when looking at this this f-stop diagram. So I would, like I said the other night, I would definitely recommend printing up page 2 of that worksheet and just keeping it with you when you go out and shoot on shooting assignments. So the zone of focus is what we're going to think about. The zone of focus is extending in front of and behind your subject. Okay. So illustrations like this make it, I think, easy to start thinking about this concept, because it's like this zone of focus, it can move depending on where your precise point of focus is. All right. And it's always going to be a little bit in front and a little bit behind where that subject is at precise plane of focus, right? And in this case, the 10 ball is at what we call the plane of focus. And then the 15 ball, which is kind of hard, this is either 15 or 11. It's hard to see the number because it's out of focus and it's in the foreground. And then behind it, we have what I think is maybe the 10 ball. And it is also out of focus. And then way deep in the background, we've got the rack to organize the balls. And we've got one of the corner pockets way back there in the background, all totally out of focus. So this, where the 10 ball resides, is right at the plane of focus. And then we got the foreground out and the background out. Now that amount of depth of field can increase with smaller f-stops or decrease with wider f-stops. Okay. So this shot tells me that it was taken with a fairly large iris, or a small f number, large diameter. Okay. Because there's it's really, really hard even to read the number on this ball right here. And it's not that far from the 10 ball. These might be, 8 or 10 inches apart, it looks like, and you can't read it already. So that's going to be one of these wider f-stops down here, 2.2 or a 2.8. Okay. We're also very close to the 10 ball. I mean, from what it looks like here, this shot was probably taken on an 85 millimeter lens, and we're probably, I'd say maybe 2 feet, 2.5 feet from the 10 ball in reality. And so on the longer lens, of course, the background is going to look out of focus very quickly inherently because it's a telephoto lens, but it's also going to display very narrow depth of field in the foreground, especially at a wide aperture. So you'd probably get that shot on a lens like this 85 millimeter right here at a very wide aperture. Okay. So In optics, particularly as it relates to film and photography, the optical phenomenon known as depth of field is the distance around the plane of focus where objects appear acceptably sharp. Although an optical imaging system can precisely focus on only one plane at a time, the decrease in sharpness is gradual on each side, that's foreground and background, of the point of focus, so that within the depth of field itself, the unsharpness is imperceptible under normal viewing conditions, okay? It may be desirable to have an entire image sharp, like if you're taking pictures outside, maybe wildlife shots or something, or landscape shots probably. Maybe you got somebody walking through the foreground picking flowers, and you got a really beautiful mountain, or a hill covered with trees in the fall with all the colors and everything, and you want it all to be kind of sharp at the same time, so that details or events happening in the foreground, middle ground, and background are all happening at once. They're all in focus at the same time, and your audience can kind of pick where they want their eye to wander throughout that image. You're inviting the audience to let their eyes wander through your frame, right? In some cases, it might be desirable for the opposite. Okay, you might want to use a large iris or aperture size so that you create a focal point, and that focal point would be probably somewhere in the middle ground, and you want that to be in sharp focus, so your audience is directed to that point for that information specifically. And then anything in the foreground will be soft, and anything in the background will be soft. Okay, and then the amount of softness will be up to you based on how wide you go on your f-stop. If you go all the way wide, that's the maximum out of focusness you can get in your foreground and background, right? And then the foreground and background will get noticeably sharper in small increments as this diaphragm gets smaller and smaller, okay? So depth of field then starts sounding like a creative option, and it starts taking on a secondary role, which is highly compositional. So your aperture, while it is a fundamental exposure control, is now also going to be an aesthetic control. So you're always going to be sort of balancing your needs for correct exposure with your creative incentive to speak to your audience visually. Okay. I showed you this shot last week and talked about how, depth of fields, rapidly falls off in the background, rapidly falls off in the foreground, and your plane of focus is a determined point that you decide as the creator of these images. What do you want your audience to see first? Circle of confusion. Circle of confusion generates a lot of confusion. Suffice it to say that circle of confusion as a concept had more relevance, I think, in the age of photochemical images in film stock than it does in digital photography. Because in digital photography, what we used to consider an acceptable measurement of the circle of confusion at a fairly microscopic level would vary with film stocks, and it would vary with the consistency of the chemicals, the grain that was on the emulsion of a film stock. Grains could vary in size. So you would have small, very fine film grains. You would have medium-sized film grains. You might have very large, coarse film grains. And those would be on high-speed emulsions, low-speed emulsions, like low ISO, think low ISO number. Low-speed fine grain emulsions would have very small, tiny grains of silver oxide that would fit really, really tightly together and give you really fine detail. So if you can think of focus as a single point on your image plane, that would be either your film or on your sensor. And as light is striking that image plane, right? If it's a very sharp point, then it's in precise focus. And as it becomes out of focus, it starts devolving into an out of focus little blob we call a bokeh ball, right? And they kind of look like this, right? Well, at the microscopic level on your film sensor, this out of focus highlight will have an actual physical size, kind of like the size of your iris in your lens, okay? And in the days of film stocks, that size could vary. In other words, we call it a tolerance, okay? And the tolerance in those days was fairly broad. It was upwards of 4/1000 of an inch or larger. And as the technology has gotten better, grains got smaller in the end, in the final waning days of film stocks. Grains got very small and very tightly packed, and therefore the tolerance of circle of confusion was getting smaller and smaller. In the days of digital sensors, the sensor, the photo sites, they don't vary as much in size as film grains did. Okay, so the tolerance now is a much smaller size. It's like 1/1000th of an inch. But the visual effect of being out of focus on your images are these nice out of focus little twinkly balls of light. Okay, so these are a byproduct of the circle of confusion principle that happens at the, like I said, the microscopic level on your chip. But just understand that the byproduct, the bokeh, as we refer to it, or the bouquet, depending on your preference, is merely how your highlights look, how point sources look as they become out of focus. So back here, I showed you a picture of a young woman standing in a flower patch, right, or whatever that is. It's looks like lacy wild flowers or something. You see how the background is delicately out of focus? Well, during the day, it just kind of looks like, out of focus details and so forth. But at night, when you're talking about things like street lights, they can be in the background, they can be point sources of light. And if you've got a lot of depth of field and the background is sharp, then all those little points of light will look like little points of light. Like, the aerial shots they take at night from the Goodyear blimp around the basketball stadium or the football stadium, and you can see the street lights along the highways around the stadium, and everything is in sharp focus, and you see the lights as little tiny lights on the cityscape, right? But if you wanted to take a really warm and sort of fuzzy picture, they're using Christmas lights right here. And I think of Christmas all the time as one of those times of year when we take pictures, and we take pictures with shallow depth of field. So Christmas lights that are hanging in the background of a shot will do this. They'll do these little autofocus blobs, and you can get these really beautiful sense of composition and drama when you have stuff like this sort of twinkling in the background. I was thinking of, this is going to sound funny, and you probably won't believe that I'm saying this, but there used to be a show on, I think it was on Home Box Office, called The Hills. And it seemed like the first season of The Hills, it was about young people growing up and socializing in Hollywood, and what life is like. It was kind of like an updated 90210 sort of TV show. And man, they used to love having the bokeh balls in the background, because like in LA on Sunset Strip and on places on Hollywood Boulevard or on Beverly Boulevard, where people can eat at the cafes that, and everybody goes to dinner at night in Los Angeles, like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. And so, invariably you're eating outside in the beautiful air. And it seems like everybody on those streets with those restaurants, they decorate in these twinkly lights, right? So all these scenes where you got these kids out socializing, going to the bars and going to the restaurants and stuff, we're getting these really long lens shots so that the backgrounds are out of focus. People have nice portrait sized close-ups in frame, and you get all these wonderful out of focus twinkly lights in the background and everything. And that was kind of a look that they had for the first season of that show. And it was really pretty for a long time, and then it started getting overused and getting old. So it's like, you don't want to do this in every shot that you're doing especially at night. You want to kind of use this effect sparingly so that it has some impact. When you do use this technique, and if you Google right now, bokeh, BOKEH, bokeh video, bokeh photography, you'll see images like, I mean, there's thousands of them on Google Images. And you can just look at all the different ways that people are using these out of focus little points of light as a compositional element. And that happens best at your widest f-stops, because then you get these nice clean circles like we have here. And then as you make your aperture smaller, you see over here at 2.8, we start seeing the polyagonal aspects of the aperture starting to appear. In other words, the aperture has, flat spots in it. The leaves of the diaphragm, I don't know if you can see it. You see how it's kind of, this one has 8 blades, so it makes like a stop sign the smaller it gets. Okay, so your autofocus highlights at small apertures will have the stop sign kind of effect, right? But at your widest aperture, at your most wide open aperture, and in this case on this lens, it's T1.5. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, there's no aperture blades visible. They're completely open. So your autofocus highlights, your bokeh, will be perfectly round and it will have a nice soft edge on it. Okay, and that can be a very pleasing compositional effect. Okay. So that's bokeh, and it has to do with circle of confusion, and I don't want to delve any deeper in circle of confusion than I've already done, because it's at this point, I don't think it's going to be a factor for you moving forward. I just want you to know where this is coming from, okay, and that you can control it. Okay, that's the beauty of it, is you can control it and use it as part of your compositional design in your images, and then to what degree is up to you. This came out of the Panavision User's Manual, and this is an old Samuelson illustration that's talking about how focal length can affect your depth of field. In this illustration, we have a film camera, and we have a gentleman looks like he's about maybe 8 feet from the camera on a 20 millimeter wide angle lens. Okay. And it looks like over here, they're trying to indicate to us that the background, maybe there's a wall back here at another 10 feet away, whatever. Okay, so at a distance that's say 8 to 10 feet from camera, and a background and a wall, let's say, that's also 8 to 10 feet away, on a wide angle lens, the likelihood that that wall is also going to be in focus is very high on the wide angle lens. You can reliably assume that detail on the wall will be very nearly the same sharpness at almost any f-stop because of the wide angle lens. Okay. Now, if this guy moves forward considerably to where he's standing almost immediately in front of the camera, then the difference between the camera to subject and subject to background is heavily weighted towards camera. It's a smaller distance. So the plane of focus will be much closer to the camera. And when that happens, and we get an exaggerated background distance, then even on a wide angle lens, then we can throw that background out of focus. But where this guy is standing right here, he's about equidistant to the camera and to the background at the same time. And on a wide angle lens, that's going to bring a lot of stuff in focus across foreground, middle ground, and background. Okay. This is trying to illustrate the reverse. I think in the case of this illustration, a more effective demonstration would be if this guy and this distance were closer to camera, because the closer you get to camera, even on a telephoto lens, the closer you get to the camera, the more likely the background is going to be out of focus. Okay. The thing about a telephoto lens, this is a 75 millimeter lens. I don't know if I can show you on this Rokinon lens. Okay. So on this Rokinon lens, the 85 millimeter, the closest focusing distance is 4 feet. You can see that on my focus scale right here. It's 4 feet. Okay. So on the 85 millimeter lens, the closest you can get and still be able to achieve a plane of focus is 4 feet away. If you get any closer than 4 feet on the 85 millimeter lens, you won't be able to achieve critical focus. It just won't. It'll bottom out and the image will still look soft. Okay. That's when we call your inside of minimum focus. Okay. On my Olympus 50 millimeter lens over here, the minimum focus distance, feet are also orange. The minimum focusing distance here, you can see 2 is the last whole number I pass my witness mark with, and it keeps going. Right? So there's 2 feet, and there's 3 feet right there, 2 feet. So this is way down at something like maybe 1.5 feet away. So on a 50 millimeter lens, you can get about 1.5 feet away, like 15 inches is usually 14, 15 inches is usually the standard. Okay. So the wider your lens, the closer you can get to your subject. That's why guys like Emmanuel Lubetsky, for instance, she shot The Revenant on really wide angle lenses, 17, 20, 24, 35, right? He stayed on those lenses most of the time because you can get really close to your subject and you can have your subject in nice focus. And then you have a really wide field of view. So he had mountains and he had big trees and he had all this wildlife in the background going on. But when you put Leo DiCaprio big in the frame, really close to the camera, you can still get those backgrounds to appear out of focus in degrees, however much you want them to be out of focus, because you get your subject very close to the camera. All right, but you can't do that with an 85. A traditional close-up is done on an 85 millimeter lens, but you're at least 4 feet away, and more than likely you're 6 or 8 feet away to get a standard close-up. I want to talk to you guys about that in a little bit when we talk about the shooting assignment, about the close-ups. But before I do that, and this will help with that concept, by the way, before I do that, I want to show you this really cool app that you can download on your computer. I'm pretty sure you can download it on your cell phone. You can download it on a tablet. It's called Depth of Field Simulator, and it's at dofsimulator.net. Okay. And if I take you guys to it, I'll show you the website and show you how this app works. What you can do is, without needing to check out any gear or anything like that from school, what you can do with this thing is pretty neat. You can, let me see if I can, let's see, let's do it. Yeah, I'm trimming off a little bit of what you can see here, but you're going to plug in some information over here on this little sort of menu board here, and it's going to show you a simulation or the effect of what all those choices would look like in this window right here. So the first thing we're going to do up here in the upper left is it's asking for interface and distance in units. Okay, so we're going to go basic right now, and then we've got our choice of units as metric or imperial. Ours are imperial. Okay. US standard units of measure. Okay, then we're going to pick our model, and we got a little pull down menu here. There's several different avatars that you can look at. So we've got man number 1, we got man number 2, and we got woman number 1, we got woman number 2, and then we got a young girl and a young boy, and then young girl number 2 and young boy number 2. Okay, so whatever you're comfortable with in terms of your subject, those are your choices. Now, I don't think it really makes a difference whether it's a young person or an old person or a person of color or not in this particular application. I'm going to show you another application when we do lighting where that will matter, but in this one, it's simply about depth of field and focal length. So whichever subject you choose, I think you're going to be fine. So let's do dude today. I rarely pick the guys because I don't know. We can also now pick our background. So this is called the park. We've also got a cathedral background. We've got a church. which kind of looks the same to me, but we have a city background, mountains, Paris, tree, building, and park. Okay. Now, park's okay, because it'll show you the area around the subject, and it'll give you some sense of the background coming in and out of focus and being compressed with long lenses. Things I think like tree and city. The city is like an aerial, so it's like this guy's floating in space. It's kind of hard to get a sense of what's happening. Church, at least, he's standing on the lawn outside the building, so the wider you get, the more you see, the building and background and context and everything. And so you can get a sense of what's happening in the image frame from that particular background. So I would pick either church or maybe building, or park. Those all seem to work best. And then you've got portrait orientation, which is for still photos, and we got landscape orientation, which is for videos. And then in the next box, it's asking us some questions about our camera. So it wants to know our sensor size. So we can tell it 35 millimeter full frame, which is 24 by 36 millimeters. We can tell it APS-C, which is like the size sensor you would have in the Canon 7D or the Canon 60D, which are cameras you guys can check out from UCF. Let me see if it asks for motion picture sizes. It kind of doesn't. So Super 35 video sensor is pretty close to APS-C. So if you used Canon APS-C for that, you'd be pretty close. And then it has micro four thirds here. So if you're a GH5 user or a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K camera user, you'd select micro four thirds. And that's a really interesting thing. I'm going to show you the difference between, let's go to full frame. Let's go back to our Canon 5D matrix here, full frame. And then we'll tell it we're using Canon EOS 5D Mark IV. Okay. And then let's do that 50 millimeter lens we were talking about a little while ago. In the next box down, it's asking us what kind of lens we want to look at. So we'll tell it 50 millimeter in the box, and it will, this little slider will go bang right to 50 millimeter. Okay. Or you can just slide it yourself and watch the millimeters change in this box over here to the left. All right, so you can slide it over until it says 50 millimeters in that box. Okay, so if you have, for instance, if you bought a vintage Takumar and it's 55, you could type 55 in over here, or just slide it over, go past 50 and stop at 55. And then that's particular to your lens. It stops at 56. Of course it does. There we go. Okay, so 55 on the slider is here. And then we'll tell it, and the next box is asking us, okay, what aperture do you want to be shooting at? Okay, I shot all of my stuff at the Cape yesterday at either f4 or f5.6. So let's go to f4, okay, and we'll play with f4 for a while. So if you can see over here, it's showing you in the little simulation box what its estimation of the depth of field would look like on the Canon 5D with a 50 millimeter lens. This would be roughly the field of view, and the right frame crop is right there. So I'm just going to slide you guys over until I can see the whole. So this is the whole representative frame right here. Damn it. Let's see if I can shrink there we go. There we go. Okay. This is what's represented by the film frame. Okay. 50 millimeters on the Canon 5D. Watch what happens. Remember I said the 50 millimeter lens on the 5D has a normal standard focal length, somewhat wide, and this is the point of view, but that it changes to something that looks like telephoto on a GH5. Let's change the camera to a GH5. We'll change the sensor size to micro four thirds from full frame. Watch what happens in this window when I change to micro four thirds. See that? It's twice the magnification of the Canon 5D. Okay, let me change back to the 5D and watch it get wide out again. Full frame, goes wide again. Now, I'll stay in 5D mode and I'll change my lens to 100 millimeter. Watch this. There's 100 millimeter. Looks just like the GH5 Micro Four Thirds sensor, doesn't it? So that is an indication to you how the two different cameras are viewing either the entire image circle from the 50 millimeter or only part of the image circle from the 50 millimeter, because the sensors are two different sizes. Okay. Let's go back to the 50 millimeter for a bit because it's a good conversation for depth of field. So here's your 50 millimeter lens again on the Canon 5D. Okay. What else can we change? Let's see. Okay. Over here, we got the camera to subject distance. It's saying the model is essentially 4 feet from the camera. You see right here, 4 feet. It says model focus. If I go all the way to the bottom of the page, it gives you a graphic illustration of how close the guy is to the camera person. You see that on the lower right? Okay. So you can either play with this slider up here, or you can just grab the subject down here and just drag him back and forth. Okay. So we're looking at him at like 4 feet a few minutes ago. Let's pull him out to 10 feet. So here's 10 feet. Now, here's what the 50 millimeter looks like when our subject is standing 10 feet away from the camera. Okay. And look at what happened to the background. We're seeing a lot more of the actual grass now and not the trees behind him. But look what happens if I go back to 4 feet. You see the trees in the background, how they're kind of softly out of focus. But the further away we push this guy, can you kind of see the grass and the little dandelions getting sharper and the trees in the background getting sharper? And the further away I push him from the camera, the sharper those details are getting. You see those trees getting really, really sharp now? Because now he's like 20 feet away from the camera on a 50 millimeter lens. So this is a simulation. It's not exactly like what you would see, but it's pretty darn close, right? So can you see how on the same camera, on the same lens, with the same f-stop, nothing changes except how far away this guy is from the camera. And as a result of his distance, we have to readjust the plane of focus out to 20 feet so that, you know, his face is at the optimum point of sharpness, right? When we do that, the background starts getting sharper as well, because the distance between him and the camera is increasing, and the distance from the guy in the background is decreasing, right? If I come back into 4 feet, watch his background get softer, blurrier, right? That's 4 feet. And then push him away to 20 feet. Same 50 millimeter lens, same f4, same sensor size. Okay. So distance, camera to subject distance has a lot to do with depth of field. Okay. Now let's keep him at 20 feet, but let's go back to that 100 millimeter lens that we had on a minute ago. Now he looks like he did with the 50 millimeter at 10 feet. So how do we got to get his close up at 20 feet away? What lens do we have to be on? I think we got to be on something like a 200 millimeter lens. Let's see. Let's go out to 200. Maybe more. Yeah. We have to be on something like a 300 millimeter lens at 20 feet to get the same look that we had with 50 millimeters, except one thing's different. You have a sense of what it is? I'm gonna show you the 50 millimeter again in a second. Here's a 300 millimeter lens at 20 feet away from the camera. We have basically a loose close-up, 2-button close-up. I put that in comments on a lot of your homework assignments. A standard close-up in the industry is, we call it a 2-button or a necktie. You see how my on my thumbnail, how I got like 1 finger of headroom above my head, and if you could if you could lift my beard, you'd see if I was wearing a necktie, my necktie knot would be sitting right on the bottom of the film frame. Okay, that's a tight close-up. A traditional industry close-up, I'd be back here, second button on a button-down shirt with 2 fingers of headroom. That's a standard close-up. Okay, I'm gonna talk about this more in a couple of weeks when we do coverage. Okay, I'm introducing these concepts to you a little bit at a time. This is a standard close-up on me, on my thumbnail on Zoom. Look at the 300 millimeter lens of this guy at 20 feet away. It's also a standard close-up. See that? Do I look as good as the guy in the video? Okay, now let's go back to that 50 millimeter lens at 4 feet. Take a note of the background. Take a note of this background right here. Okay, 300 millimeters. All right, now let's go back to 4 feet. Boo! Big close-up. And 50 millimeters. The subject is roughly the same size, but there's something very different about that background, isn't there? What is it?
The background is blurrier.
Blurrier?
I would
The other
I
one
would
has
say
a
it's
bump.
clearer.
Oh, and the other one, yeah.
Uh,
The background's maybe a little clearer, but there's something even more drastically different about the background.
Isn't there just more background?
Watch me do it again. 20 feet, 300 millimeter lens, bang. Tell me about the background.
There's less of it. Like you captured more with the
We also call this concept, and this is, I don't want to confuse you. We also call this aperture, but think of it as field of view. On a 300 millimeter lens, the field of view is very narrow, and it'll have a degree angle of measure that you can find out in the specs of the lens if you really want to find it. 300 millimeter angle of view is going to be something very narrow, like 25, 20 degrees maybe. All right, and a 50 millimeter is going to have a wider angle of view of something like 70 or 80 degrees, right? So yes, in essence, you see less of the background. And it's all nicely out of focus, isn't it, on a 300 millimeter? And you see less of it. So if you wanted to simplify, let's change the background to something very complex with a lot of detail. And this is where it's going to start to make sense to you. Let's change this background from the park to, let's go building. All right. What is that behind him?
a set of doors.
Maybe. Let's look. Let's change the distance back to 4 feet. And let's change the focal length back to 50 millimeters. Well, we can't really see what's behind him. If I push him away, it'll reveal, yeah, it's either that window over his shoulders there, or it could be that set of doors right there. Okay. What's happening is the camera is going up and down as we increase the distance from the camera. I'm not sure why they're doing that. I guess they figure it makes a better illustration. But look at the disc. So look at the background at 4 feet away on a 50 millimeter lens. And then to get the same framing, I'm going to go back to 20 feet at 300 millimeter. That's 290, 300 right there. Okay. But the background is notably different. It's a much narrower angle of view on the 300 millimeter. So that's a way of simplifying busy backgrounds that you don't want in your composition. If you're trying to, if this guy was about to say something really, really important in the dialogue, and you don't want the audience to be even remotely tempted to look at something going on in the background. Okay. You want them to focus on what he's about to say because it's critical to understanding the narrative and the story up to this point, and it's going to give you some sense of what his next move is going to be to resolve his problem. The author wants you to know what this man is about to say. So we're going to simplify the visuals by clearing the background out of any superfluous detail that doesn't contribute to this moment and this mood, right? And you can do that by choosing a lens that has a narrower angle of view. Isolate your subject within that angle of view in a nice composition. In this case, he's centered. Okay. And then use a wide f-stop to throw that background out of focus. And you get this guy against this very simplified, what we call a nondescript or ND background. And he is definitely the focal point. There is nothing else in that frame that is capturing my imagination or my attention. And I think you would agree. There's really nothing back there to focus on. So psychologically, you then go back to focusing on what the guy has to say. It's a little bit like, controlling your audience, disciplining your audience to listen to what I'm saying to you right now, by removing all of their other sensory temptations, So this is why we have so many different kinds of lenses. I mean, otherwise we'd shoot on a 35 mil all the time for everything, right? And we would just walk closer to the subject or back up to get wider or closer up, right? But a 35 millimeter angle of view always has that kind of wideness, like 110 millimeters, something like that, or 110 degrees, something like that, really wide, right? And so even when you get really close to somebody, watch, let me just show you. Let's go to a 35 millimeter lens, down back here. Now, this is it at 20 feet away. So he's got to come all the way up to 2.2 feet from the camera to get the same subject size in the frame. But then look at the background. We got all this stuff in the background now. All this over here to sort of distract the audience. Oh, what's that over there? Columns. Oh, early Grecian art. Oh yeah, what's that? The Parthenon or the Supreme Court? I don't know. Or the library in New York City. What is that? And he says something and you don't hear it. You're not paying attention, right? So we have all these different lenses, not to be confusing, it's not all just extra stuff to worry about. There really are really specific reasons why you might want these long telephoto lenses. Now in the film world, we tend to not go longer than 135 for most of the stuff we shoot, because of the size of our sets and the proximity of characters to one another. We don't typically need something longer than a 135, but occasionally we do. And when we do, we order those lenses as a separate daily rental, use them for that scene or that shot, whatever we got to get. And then we'll send that piece of gear back to the rental house and get it off budget, right? So we'll only rent it for a day, whereas we might have the rest of the Rokinons for the whole movie, because we're using basically everything from 16 to 135 almost every day. The 300 we might use once every couple of weeks, and so we'll order it as a one-day rental, get it in there, shoot what we need to shoot with it, and send the lens back. Okay. So I think this is a fun tool. When I first tried it, I was like, man, that's not the real thing because of the way the backgrounds move and stuff. But I'll tell you what, there's nothing else like it out there on the market. And so what I did is I called Mike. His name is Michael Bumowski. And I said, dude, I really like your app and I want to use it for my classes and stuff. It's really unique. There's nothing else like it out there. And he, he gave us his blessing to use this app for whatever we need. So you can go on his website, doesn't cost anything. Download it to your computer. I think you can download it to your computer. If not, just save the the URL, favorite it, and you can go to it for free anytime and just play, man. Put some lenses in here. Here's a 45 millimeter. Okay, at a 2.8, what's it going to look like if he's 5 feet away? Boop. That's what he's going to look like, right? And you don't need to rent anything. You don't need to go anywhere. You can do this. Like, these are great activities for like on a plane or on a bus or in a car on a trip, or if it's raining outside, cold and snowing outside, and you want to practice, but you really, you don't want to deal with all the external factors. You can just curl up on your couch or in bed with a blanket and play and look at what these lenses are doing. And it's pretty darn close to what really, really happens. So, oh, this is cool. Look here, lock field of view. I've never tried that before. Let's see if that will do something neat. There's field of view. If I lock that, let's see what happens. Oh yeah, look at that. Very cool. Okay. Haha, learn something new every day. All right, 5 feet away on a 50 mil lens. Now we've got him in front of those windows. I'm sorry, 10 feet away, 20 feet away on a 300. There. Wow, what? That's strange. 300. 60 feet away, 50 feet away, 20 feet away. There we go. 20 feet away, 107, 100 millimeter lens. F4 looks like that. 300 mil looks like that. Oh, I know why. It's moving this. What did I tell you about the minimum focusing distance of the 85? How far away was it? Remember?
4 feet.
4 feet, and the 50 millimeter was 2 feet, right? It moved my distance slider, and I'm like, why is it doing that? On this app, the 300 millimeter lens has a minimum focusing distance here. And at 300 millimeters, let's see, will it let me do it? It shouldn't let me do, yeah, see that? The slider changes focal length up top. So the minimum distance on the 300 looks like, oh, right about there, 61 feet. That's the minimum focusing distance. If I get the subject any closer up here, the focal length is going to change. It's going to get wider. Watch. See that? That's what's going on. So there's a minimum focusing distance in this app on this particular lens of 60 feet. Okay. That's why that changed. Where's 85? Here's 85 mils. Let's see if we can get 4 feet away on the 85. Whoops. This would be minimum focusing distance on an 85. And we've gone to what we call a choker close-up. So it's no longer 2-button close-up. It's up here in what we call a choker. Okay. Still a close-up, but it's a tighter close-up than a standard. 85 millimeters at 10 feet is going to look something like this. This is your standard medium shot. 10 feet away. Now, it just so happens that, especially with stage work, subjects tend to be about 8 feet from the camera, right about here. So on an 85, 10 feet away, you would get what we call, this is a little bit tighter than a medium because his belt buckle is out of frame by a significant amount. And it's usually the belt buckle that we crop out at a medium with about 3 fingers of headroom. Okay, so this would be what we would call a loose single. And I put that remark on some of your homework assignments as well. It's one person in the frame. It's tighter than a medium, but it's not a close-up because the close-up would be cropped up here. So it's a loose single, okay? And this is a fairly common size. Look at TV and try to, next time you watch television, try not to think about the storyline and the characters anymore. Just look at it in terms of lens sizes and see if you can figure out what kind of lenses they're on. That's a good thing to do when you're using this app. Look at this, 85 mils, f4 for depth of field. It's at a 4 at about 8 feet away. This is your frame. Now, turn on your favorite TV show and tell me how many times you see this framing in that TV show. You're going to see it a lot. This is a standard piece of coverage right here. Okay, especially a sitcom, because we got room for gestures. We can still see the person talking, but we have a broader sense of the action plus dialogue in this size. This size is, strictly speaking, a dialogue size. I got something important to say. Lens is going to change, or camera distance is going to change for this framing. Okay. This framing is dialogue plus action. This framing is strictly action. This is what we call a cowboy, where we crop mid-thigh right down here. And then full body is way out here. It's either above the sneakers or includes the sneakers. Long shot. Some of you gave me this as a medium. This is what we call a long shot. A medium is going to be cropped here, right at the belt buckle. Okay. And 3 fingers of headroom above the head. Okay. And then this kind of thing out here, this is a long shot, establishing shot. Okay. This frame is more about telling us where the guy is than what the guy's doing. Okay. In this frame, it's where is he? In this frame is maybe who's with him. Is he on a date? Who is it? Right. This frame is they're talking. What are they talking about? And this frame is no, but seriously, I really mean to tell you this thing right now. Okay. That's really the difference between these sizes, what's going on in each of these sizes. Think about that, because you're going to have a coverage assignment in a couple of weeks. And think about what these sizes mean. These are psychological sizes that we've been programmed to understand when we watch television. Okay. You don't realize it, but you're already programmed to understand film coverage from the point of view of framing and the subject size within the frame and depth of field, believe it or not. In a close-up like this, where I really want you to listen to what I'm saying right now, my background is out of focus. Okay. These are the sort of the unwritten rules of cinematography and coverage. This is what we think about. You know, if I'm shooting something, if I'm shooting a commercial for the director, I'm talking to the director. So in this scene where the kid pops the top off of the Coca-Cola and we do an insert of the bottle with the ice chips all on it and the bottle is sweating, and we look at the kid in close up and he's sweating. He just got off the basketball court and it's a hot day and we know that. And in the background, things are out of focus, but we see the basketball net in the background and we see a little bit of downtown LA out of focus and some palm trees out of focus. So we know that he's in a place with nice weather. He's been playing b-ball all day. It's hot. He's going to pop that ice cold Coke and he's good. What frame is he going to chug that Coke in? Is he going to chug that Coke in this frame so you can see that he's at the basketball court? No. Is he going to chug it in this frame so you can see his buddy that's with him that didn't get a Coke because he didn't bring one? No. Is it going to be this frame over here? Maybe, but it's probably going to be this frame, because now we're going to see that product big in the frame with our person chugging, and we're going to see that person drinking that Coke. And what's it going to make you want to do? Run to the fridge and see if you got any Coke, right? This is all psychological. These are the things that we do to you with our photography all the time on commercials and movies and TV shows. I want you to start thinking in these terms now about these images. Okay. All right. Let's see what else I got on my presentation for you. Yes. Okay. So have fun with this. I hope you enjoy it. I think it's a lot of fun. I play with this thing every once in a while when I'm bored, thinking about how I can have these conversations with you guys and make it kind of fun. But I talked to you about filters helping you control exposure. Now, today we're talking about depth of field, and we're talking about the notion that I know on my 50mm lens that I get really nice out of focus backdrops at f2.8. But I'm outside at the park and it's daytime and I can't get a 2.8. It's too bright. I look at my LCD and the image is all blown out. And I can't change my shutter speed to something higher or it'll get all stroby looking, and that's no good. I got to lock that in at 1/48 because I'm recording sound. I'm at my ISO of 800 because the manufacturer said that's the best one, but I can lower that. I can go to 400 or 200, and that'll make the camera a little bit less sensitive, but it's really bright out here. So even after I go to ISO 200, the image is still too bright on my EVF. I got to have that ND filter. And which one am I going to need? Well, I'm probably going to need something fairly dense if I'm outside on a day like this. All the way to the left is no filter. One layer of ND, 2 layers of ND, 3 layers of ND, and you can see it getting progressively darker. Okay. If you got that many filters and you feel like carrying all that glass around, you can do it. You know, it's a stack like this, right? And then you got to have the, wherever I put it, the matte box and all that other nonsense, right? It starts getting to be a lot of stuff to carry around. So I went to the coast this weekend and I was like, you know what? I could have brought this guy. I love this because it's got my cinema zoom on there and it's the little GH5 and the matte box and the focus, blah, blah, and everything. But 2 weeks ago when I did that and I brought the big tripod for the heavier camera and everything, I ended up with all this stuff I'm lugging around. I'm tired. This is like work. I don't want to do this. And so I was like, I'm going to take their camera. So I grabbed my FZ1000. I threw a variable ND filter on the front. You can just barely kind of see it there. Right. And I went out to take some pictures, shoot some video with it. So I went to the Astronaut Memorial and I just played with and I put myself through the same drill that I talked to you guys about last week about the variable ND filter, right? So lock in your ISO, lock in your frame rate and your shutter speed. Decide what f-stop you want to shoot at, because you're going to know, especially if you use that little that app a lot, you're going to know what f-stops you like the backgrounds looking like. You know, on feature films, our backgrounds are f4, f5.6. Okay. On television shows, our backgrounds are f2, f2.8. And it has to do with the screen size and presentation. It has to do with how far you sit from your television, what you can see at 6 or 8 feet from your TV. In a theater, you're maybe 30 feet from the screen and the screen is notably bigger. Okay. But we need different f-stops for the backgrounds to look right in that proportion of exhibition, right? This is not random. This is all by design. Okay, so you decide. I'm doing stuff for the television. I'm doing stuff for feature films. I'm at 2.28 or I'm at 4.56. Well, I went outside to the beach and I put my camera on 4 at 60th of a second because I don't have 1/48 in the camera. It doesn't go there. I don't know why. I locked all that in, ISO 800, and I shot some stuff at the Astronaut Memorial. So the Astronaut Memorial has these little kiosks and it has a lot of names on associated. Each one of these is an Apollo flight. And then the 3 guys who were in the rocket, their plaques are here with their handprints and stuff and their signatures. And then everybody associated with the flight is on these engravings here. So each one of these represents an Apollo flight to the moon. There's a couple in here from Skylab, and there's a couple of Gemini flights in here as well. And then you got this big thing in the middle, this hub. It's got a statue of John F. Kennedy on here, and it's got his famous speech engraved on the pedestal. And this is like a bronze statue of JFK. And then you've got the Apollo symbol that was on all the crew patches. You have a representation of Earth here, and the moon over here. And it's this big sort of solemn statuary in town. And so I picked an angle, right? And I put the variable ND on the camera. And so I picked at random. I just said, okay, what's my exposure going to look like if I dial in the minimum amount on the ND filter, which is only one layer, right? So it was ND what? ND2, right? Yeah. So ND2, f4, 60th of a second, ISO 800, and it was kind of like this, maybe a little bit brighter. And then I'm going to play the video, and you're going to see me dial the filter, and you're going to watch the image come right down into a nice color balance. And then I'm going to hang there for a minute, and then I'm going to dial it all the way over to like the densest part of the filter to see how dark it can get. And then I'll dial it back again. So check it out. There's the nuclear wide open exposure. Then I start dialing it back down again. This is around perfect exposure right in here. The most realistic according to the day. It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I just want to see, okay, how dark will it get? So I start spinning the filter towards the dark side. And I could darn near get to a complete fade to black with this filter. So that's the neat thing about these fader NDs. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to ask John Bowen to buy you guys fader NDs. So the next time you guys have to pull these cameras out, you'll also check out a fader ND with the camera. You know what f-stop you want. Dial it onto the camera. Lock in your shutter speed, lock in your ISO, lock in your frame rate, and then just dial the color and the density in with the filter. It's so easy. But you still have the control of deciding what f-stop you want to be at. So you could say, okay, I want to be at my widest f-stop. Okay, that just means you got to dial the filter even further over to get the exposure to balance. Or I want, at f4 on a wide lens, like this was like a 35 mil lens. I knew that some of the trees in the background were going to be sharp, but it would have a fairly normal fall off, wouldn't be too extreme. And it would give me a little shot at getting my focus correct. Okay. So f4, I was happy with an f4, but I could have said, you know what? There's lots of detail in the background that's important too, or I want to be able to read the engravings. I'm going to go to like f8 or f11. You could do that too, and then just dial less of the filter into effect to balance your image. But this is now the next level of digital cinematography, is being able to dial in these neutral densities. You don't have to swap one for the other to get them darker or lighter anymore. Just put one on and spin it until you get what you want. So in terms of the exposure triangle, remember you can lock in some of these values. Choose your aperture aesthetically, or choose your shutter speed aesthetically. Remember we watched Saving Private Ryan the other day, and we wanted that shutter speed to look stroby and over crisp and hyper real. If you're doing that, then remember to balance the other two variables accordingly. There's not much aesthetically to say about ISO. Typically, ISO is just getting the camera to function at the appropriate energy state so your images are nice and clean. But maybe there's a situation where you want those images to be really gritty and grainy. And if that's the case, then play with your ISO until you get those results, right? If, for instance, let's say you're doing a flashback piece, right? And it's a scene where somebody is thinking back to something that happened to them 10 years ago. So you might like that over grainy effect to sort of simulate the difference between the current time frame and the past. The graininess is like associated with old-timey photos, right? And you might even desaturate. You might switch to monochrome on the camera for this particular scene so that you don't record any color, just black and white, and then change the ISO so you get this really grainy, noisy images, and shoot those clips for your flashback, playing with ISO as a creative aesthetic choice, right? And then just remember you got to balance the other two factors accordingly when you do that. Okay. So there's a lot of power in this control if you choose to use it. You don't have to, but you can. And when you do, sometimes the effects are really, really great. I'm not going to delve into the meter really too much with you guys. I'll wait till lighting and then I'll give you a little bit more on how that works. But for now, just remember that we are going to cover the light meter at some point. And I've told you already about basically how it works. You plug the ISO in, you dial that into the meter, you tell it what frame rate you're using, and then you stick the meter into the light, check the reading, and find out what recommended f-stop the meter is telling you to use on the camera. And then from there, you have some choices to make. Okay. I put a glossary of terms on the end of this thing in case anybody is still wondering what some of these words are that I'm throwing out there at you. I think you must pretty well know what aperture means by now. We talked about angle of view today. Okay. The observable point of view of a lens, described by its size in millimeters, defined by an angle or a particular kind of framing. Okay. Background and foreground, that's fairly self-explanatory, right? There's 3 zones in an image: the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Okay. We can focus on one of those, 2 of those, or all 3 of those at any given time. It depends on what your story is, and as a director, how you want your audience to perceive that information or process that information. What do you want them to be looking at? Composition is the arrangement of elements within our cinematic frame. Depth of field, now you understand, as a selected zone of focus, and it varies in size based on your f-stop, your focal length, or your distance from the camera. The diaphragm describes your aperture. Exposure is the act of controlling the brightness of our image. Too bright, too dark, somewhere in the middle. Balance, balance. The exposure triangle is the principle we've been talking about all along, the 3 variables principally concerned with exposure control. You now know what an f-stop is. It's a numerical value, but it's also an increment or a standard unit of exposure control, and we control exposure in f-stops. Focus is the ability to resolve our image from something in a blurry state to something in a detailed, highly focused state. Focal distance, focal length. Focal length refers to the sizes of our lens. Focal distance is the distance from the subject of the camera. The image field is what we see. The angle of view, everything that we can see from the foreground to the background. The iris is also describing the diaphragm, which is describing your f-stop. The plane of focus is that critical point. And usually the plane of focus, no matter how far the subject is from the camera, is the eye or the tip of the nose. If it's far away, I just use the tip of the nose because I'm running a tape measure out from the camera and I'm checking that distance, whatever it is, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. And then I go back to the camera and I dial that into the lens, 30 feet, 20 feet, 15 feet, right? And that becomes my principal point of focus or my plane of focus. And to resolve is to bring an image gradually into focus from a state of out of focusness. Okay. That's it. You got a homework assignment. So I wrote an article and it just came to print in, I think it's out this month in print, and it was out online at Video Maker magazine last month. It's called Everything You Wanted to Know About Depth of Field, or What is Depth of Field? Okay. Read that. It's in your downloadable PDFs. And then read chapter 6 out of the Introduction to Cinematography. It's about shots and scenes and time. It's the beginning of our discussion about coverage. Okay. It's about 20 pages. And it's got stuff in here about depth of field too. So this will be a good read. I think you'll find that very interesting. And that's it. So at this point, I'll take questions. And then if anybody wants to talk about the worksheet, we can talk about that. But that's the end of the actual lecture. So if you got somewhere you want to be, you don't have to hang out unless you got questions about this or the homework assignment.
Did you? I can't remember if before if we had agreed that you were gonna post the PowerPoints on our in our discussions like on a web course. I can't remember if we had decided whether you were gonna do that or not. Can you
I did
remind me?
I did a couple, but right before the midterm. If you want, I'll put this one up. I'll convert it to PDF and put it up there for you.
Yeah, I'd
Essentially,
appreciate
everything I've talked about here is essentially in my article. So if you check out the Video Maker article, that's pretty much this talk right here. I wrote that article, and then this discussion was the discussion that I gave them for my contract renewal back in November. So I created this presentation for them. They're like, what would you talk about in your cinematography class? And I said, well, depth of field is a real popular subject. So I created this for them, and I previewed it with them first. So, and it was based on the article. So if you read that article, you'll get a really good sense of this discussion in more detail. Because I think, nobody responds well to this on the frame when I give a presentation like this. So I don't put a lot of text in these cells anymore, right? So there's maybe 4 or 5, there might not even be that much. There might be like 2 pages of actual script in this whole presentation. And I think my article for Video Maker was like, it's like 10 or 12 pages. It's long. It's a feature article. So maybe not that long. With pictures and ads, it's about that long, maybe. Check it out. That's the full conversation. Okay. But I'll put this up on PDF for you if you want.
Thank you.
Any questions about that worksheet? Everybody pretty well handle that okay? Uh-oh. What's that mean, Jasmine?
Oh yeah, that one.
Was it a disaster?
I couldn't think about it anymore because I think I psyched myself out. But I did watch the supplementary video that you uploaded a couple days after the initial lecture, and that the portion where you were assigning values of like over or under exposure like really helped. I was like, I'm gonna use that method. So
Yeah,
was
the
cool.
critical method, right?
Yeah, it made it a lot more.
At a time. Yeah. Let me pull that for anybody who didn't catch that video. Let me pull that up. I think I got it. Not here. Let's see. Where is it? Exposure triangle worksheet. Okay, so what we're talking about here is solving for the variable in columns first. So look at the rate of change in the column and assign a value to it. So like ND filters, for instance, or here, let's go over here, ISOs, that's easy, right? The very first ISO, the baseline was 800. So for every line, every solution, did it change or did it stay the same? If it stayed the same, I would put a 0 next to it. If it went to 1600, that's twice 800, which represents a brightening of the image, and it's double the original value, which means it's 1 f-stop. So it's 1 f-stop overexposed. So I would put a +1 next to 1600. And then 3200 is +2 because it's double 1600. So that's +2 overexposure, right? Then shutter never changes. So that's always 0. Frame rate, sometimes it changes and sometimes it doesn't. If it goes to 12, that's +1. 48 is -1. 96 is -2, right? Well, if you got a +2 ISO and a -2 frame rate, those cancel out, right? So it's all about canceling out pluses and minuses, and then what's left you have to compensate for in the shaded box, whatever it's asking you for. So in the case of, like, look at the example right here. It was the ISO changed to 1600. The frame rate stayed the same. The shutter stayed the same. And the ND stayed the same. So that was pretty easy. 1600 represented +1 overexposure. So that meant whatever was going to go here had to be -1 compared to the original, which is 4. F4, if I change from F4 to 5.6, I darkened my image by 1 f-stop. Well, that becomes a -1. -1 and +1 cancel each other out, which makes this the new exposure solution for 1600 ISO. 1/16 ND, f5.6 on the lens, 1600 ISO, and then the shutter stays the same and the frames per second stays the same. So all you're doing is balancing pluses with minuses. When you get to 0, that's your solution, those numbers. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to look at this. And I don't know. I mean, now, after so many years, my brain processes it all at the same time. And I just go, oh, it's that. But in the beginning, it's easy. It's a little bit like, I used to preach this method of solution, this problem solving to my guys in the lighting department. When you have a light that consists of 5 parts, a head, a power supply, a power cable, a bulb, and a power source, and the light doesn't turn on when you turn the switch, what do you check first? Do you check everything at the same time? No, you check one thing at a time, and you eliminate, by process of elimination, you ultimately find out the thing that's causing a problem. Is it the power supply is no good? Is it the cable's no good? The bulb no good? The head no good? Or the ballast no good? Well, we'll figure it out by checking each thing one at a time. And if you solve this worksheet the same way, each thing one at a time, figure out what the rate of change is, and then compare the solution as a sum, I think it's the easiest way to do the paper.
Oh, I had one more question. It doesn't pertain to the worksheet, but the last assignment we did, the shooting fundamentals.
Mhm.
I just wanted to know if you got my response, because I guess the YouTube link didn't work for you, but I was able to view it. And I had sent it to like 3 other people, and they were able to like play it on their phones too.
Really?
So, yes.
Send it to me again.
Okay.
Send it to me through the web courses email box.
Right, because the assignment's closed off.
Yeah, instead of the other way. And then if I can open it, I will.
All right. Thank you.
Sometimes this stuff, okay, that's your mulligan, right? Part of your responsibility when you submit assignments online is you need to be checking those links to make sure they work. Don't assume, because I get a lot of folks like, if I give you guys some instructions on how to submit your material, if I say to you, give me 5 shots, 4 still photographs, and 1 video clip, I want the 4 photographs on the same document, and I want the link from YouTube for your video clip. I want your name, and then you can label each shot, tell me what it is. And you wouldn't believe the variations that I would receive. I get people that send me individual JPEG files with I have no idea what they are. Open it up and it's just an image file. There's no title on it. I don't know. There's no name on it. And then I get a YouTube link and I go to the YouTube link and click on it. It's not even a link. Now I got to copy and paste it into my own YouTube window. I'm doing a lot of work for your assignment and I shouldn't have to do that. If I'm the client, right, I paid you to do all that work. Right? I didn't pay you so I could do all that work later when you submit your materials to me. Okay? Everything needs to be labeled. It needs to be exactly the way I asked for it. So all I got to do is open one document, your Word doc, click on each one of your images if they're links, or look at them embedded on the Word doc with your little title, wide shot, medium shot, close up, whatever. Right? And then click on an active link on that same document, and that will open up a YouTube window for me. I'll look at your homework assignment, it'll play back, and I'll give you a grade, right? That's just like what should happen if I was a client and I paid you $2,500 a day to shoot a commercial for me. I expect you to deliver me a hard drive with all of my files on it from the original photography. I want to see the finished proxy file. I want to see the finished native file that's going to go to the broadcaster. And then I want all my assets in a folder, right? And I'm going to click on the proxy to check it's okay. And then I'm going to click on the broadcast file to make sure it plays back before I send it to the broadcaster, and they uplink it for a commercial. And if I don't get all those things, I will never hire you again, because in the industry, that's what it's about. I ask you guys for something and you give me back what I asked for to the letter, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah, no, I
everybody
agree.
else does, right?
I
Everybody else
wasn't,
does.
I
No,
didn't read
I know.
hyperlink.
I'm just giving you,
Okay.
I'm giving you the, this is the same, you know, bit I would give anybody, because I get a lot of people say, well, can't you just open, what's the big deal? Cut and paste a link. The big deal is I got over 300 students. And if I have to cut and paste over 300 links, I'm a tired puppy at the end of the day.
Mm,
And I don't want to be a tired puppy at the end of the day, right? So, and it's not my problem, it's your problem. So I don't pay you to solve your problems for you, is the line we give in the business all the time, right? So that's the reasoning behind it. It's not that I'm trying to be a hard ass. It's that I'm trying to condition you now to what to expect from clients who are going to pay you real money to do this work. When odd thing happens, right? If you do something as a favor for somebody, they'll overlook a lot of stuff. But the minute they pay you, even if they pay you $100 to do something, they become the most demanding people you can imagine. And if it's not right, they want you to go back and do it over again, and as many times as you have to make it the way they wanted it. Because now they paid you real money. Something very strange happens when people pay real money, right? So that's why if a link doesn't work, right, and I go and I open somebody's assignment and, you know, I can't access it, that's it. I'm done. I'm bailing out. I'm going to the next assignment. Zero, right? And that's why. All right. But this is your mulligan. So next time, though,
It has to be hyperlinked.
there
Got
won't
it.
be but now there won't be a next time. Now yours are going to be perfect from here on out. I know that, right? So we don't have to ever deal with this again. But I'm going to catch somebody. I'm going to catch somebody next week. I know I will, without fail. I'll catch somebody, right? And it's, you know, a little 10-point assignment is not gonna fail you for the course, right? But it's just enough sting for you to remember that it's important for you to put your name on your assignment, to submit the document you're supposed to submit, right?
Mhm.
My writers, man, I told my writers, I don't want a Celtics file. I don't want a Joe's screenwriting software file because you got it free on the internet weirdness. I don't even want a Final Draft file, even though I use Final Draft to write my own work. I want a PDF, because I can open a PDF in web courses. I can read your script and I can tell you if you formatted it correctly or not, right? And you would not believe. Somebody tried to, you know, they were angry with me that they submitted a Celtics file and I gave them a 0. Why did you give me a 0? I can't open your file. What do you mean you can't open it? I don't use Celtics. You gave me a formatted file that was Celtics only. I told you I wanted a PDF. Therefore, I couldn't open your homework assignment. I couldn't open it to see it, so I couldn't grade it. Okay. That's the reasoning behind it. And then it'll never be a problem again.
Mhm.
Yeah, she said,
Mhm.
anybody else have a difficulty with the worksheet? How about these questions on the backside? Were you okay with these? Did you understand what I was asking for once you did the first page? The second page should have been fairly self-explanatory.
First one stressed me out a little bit just because I think you can like see that there's noise starting to appear at like a 800 ISO, but it's not the noisiest. So I think I wrote that and I was like, you might notice some at 800, but like it's not the noisiest. It's going to be 3200 shots.
Yeah, the only thing I can say is since 800 was the baseline, I think there's one solution. I think it's number 7 where it's a 400 ISO solution. But 400, if 800 was the baseline and your instructions were 800 was a perfect exposure, then
True.
whatever noise happened at 800 should logically be deemed as acceptable. But if it's higher than that and 16 or 3200 qualifies, those would be the appropriate responses to that question.
Okay.
So I think it would be, the answer was like 2, 4, and 8, I think, for this one,
Mm-hmm.
number 1, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, any other questions before I let you guys go?
No, this is a cool lecture. Thank you.
Okay. So this was today, week 10, depth of field. Next week, we're going to do color theory. We won't get too deep in the weeds about that. I just want to talk to you about indoor color balance versus outdoor color balance and what the difference is and the scales we use to determine that. And I'll talk to you a little bit about color in principle. And it's probably going to be a review conversation for any of you who've already had art in any class or art in high school, right? It's all basically the same thing. And then the week after that, we're gonna talk about lighting. And then we'll do camera movement, and I think that's going to back us up against spring break. And then we're going to come back and we'll review for the final exam and we'll be done. So we're almost towards the end at this point. And I hope that you're getting something out of it if you don't plan on being in the camera department when you graduate. Hopefully, at least you'll understand what we do in the camera department, and how it might affect your life in, say, the art department or in the audio department or in the editing department. That'll make sense when we do coverage, which is, where is coverage actually? Actually, I think that's here. I changed some stuff out. So, yeah. So even editors need to know a little bit about what we do to understand the pieces that they receive from us in post-production. So any of my editors out there, fear not. It is not wasted effort on your part to understand this class. All right. Well, if there's no questions, then no comments, no nothing, I will move to adjourn. Anybody second that motion?
Bye.
Very good. All right, folks, then have a good afternoon. Thanks so much for your time and attention. If you have any questions, or if you think of something after this, just send me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye.